I have a saying, don't invite me to your party and then become irritated when I show up. Don't initiate drama and then complain when you get drama back. Don't initiate aggression and then complain when the other person aggresses back. If someone walks up to you and punches you in the face, it means that they are sending you a message that punching people is acceptable. Therefore, they're inviting you to punch them because that is acceptable behavior to them. That's why it's really important to go back to the original moment that the aggression happened. The timeline of events is paramount. It's important to understand who the active party was initially and who the passive party was initially. Who initiated the aggression? That's the question that I ask when I'm trying to figure out who's the abuser and who's the target. Or in other words, who is the active party and who is the passive party? Because the passive party is sitting back, minding their own business. They're not talking to anybody. They're not initiating. They're not creating anything. This is the passive party. The active party is the person or the group who initiates the aggression. They are active. They are moving towards, they are creating the event. And then what happens is the passive party then activates, but only after the active party initiates the aggression. That's why it's so important to understand the timeline of events before we form an opinion about who's in the wrong and who's in the right. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. You might have a group of people sitting in their front yard having a picnic. They're on private property, having lunch. They're not noisy. They're not bothering anyone. This is what I consider a passive person, a passive party. And then the active party, let's say it's a neighbor, and they come out of their house and they feel irritated that people are having a picnic in their front yard because it is not aesthetically pleasing to see people having a picnic in their front yard. At least this is the neighbor's opinion. So the neighbor then walks across the street. The neighbor is the active party. They are creating the action. They are creating the engagement. So they walk over to the neighbor's front yard and they say, I don't think so. You need to pack up that picnic and take it inside or take it into your backyard. I don't want to see people having picnics in my neighborhood. So you can see that the neighbor initiated the interaction. So then let's say the people having the picnic stand up and they say, hey, this is a private property, this is my front yard, and we're not being noisy. If the worst offense is that it is not aesthetically pleasing for you to see us sitting on a blanket in my front yard having sandwiches, if that is offending you, sorry, but I don't agree with this and you need to go away. Well, let's say the neighbor gets really angry and she says, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to go knock on everyone's door. I'm going to call the fire department. I am going to call the newspaper. I'm furious and I'm going to cause so much trouble for you guys right now if you don't pack up your picnic and go inside. So Well, let's say then that the people having the picnic, they are really irritated now, and they get up and someone says, get out of here, and throws their water on the neighbor. Well, you can see at that point, if you were an observer and you walked up and all you saw was someone splashing water on the neighbor, you're going to think, oh my gosh, and you might be very confused about who the abuser is and who the target is. You're going to be very confused about what's happening. You're just going to see that there is a big toxic explosion happening. And at that point, when people come in midway, or they come in sort of after the initial aggression has happened, it's very confusing to identify who the abuser is, who the target is, because at that point, it often just it's a big toxic mess. That's why it's so important to find out who initiated the interaction. Why did they initiate the interaction? And that will fill you in on the sequence of events. And in my opinion, the timeline of events is paramount because it helps you understand who was instigating, who created the friction, who created the event. Because if the neighbor had never walked across the street to, some of us will say, cause trouble, then none of the other stuff would have happened. The water being thrown, the cursing, the verbal attacks on both ends, none of that would have happened. And so that's why it's so important to find out the details of that initial interaction. Remember that when you have a passive party and then you have an active party who is initiating the aggression, who is initiating the threats, that will clue you in when you're trying to figure out who is the aggressor, who is the abuser, who is the target. And it gets very confusing because often after the aggressor has aggressed upon the target's reaction can be overwhelming. It can appear to be an overreaction. It can appear to be extremely dramatic. And after you hear the story, you might even think, you know, that target tossing water on her, that was unacceptable, inappropriate behavior, and I don't agree with that. But you have to remember that none of that would have happened if the aggressor had not instigated the interaction, had not aggressed upon the target. I hope that gives you a better understanding of why, in my opinion, the timeline of events is paramount. It's very important to understand who initiated the interaction, because the results, the event would not have occurred. When we see a big toxic explosion happening among two people or a group of people, it's really important to understand, to go back to the very beginning. And to me, that matters. That matters a lot. I will always put the blame, the judgment, on the person who initiates the aggression. Of course, sometimes you do have situations where the true aggressor is so passive-aggressive that it's impossible for the target to even identify or tell you how or when the aggression occurred. That does happen sometimes, so we have to take that into account. But most of the time, you are able to identify who the aggressor is and who the target is. Who aggressed upon who first? That's it. As always, stay strong and get toxic people out of your life.